Hi everybody, I am going to talk about the family therapy, one of the therapeutic approaches in social casework practice. The family therapy, also referred to as couple therapy and family systems therapy, is a branch of psychotherapy that works with families and couples in intimate relationships to nurture change and development. It tends to view change in terms of the systems of interaction between family members. It emphasizes family relationships as an important factor in psychological health. At the end of my talk, you will be able to learn the family systems assumptions, know the prominent schools of family therapy, and understand the various techniques of family therapy. Let me just state the assumptions of family systems. The family systems perspective assumes that a client's problematic behavior may serve a particular purpose of the family, may be an indication of the inability of the family to operate productively, especially during the developmental transitions, or may be a symptom of dysfunctional patterns handed down across generations. Since a client is operating in a living system, any change in one part of the unit has repercussions on other parts, and so any treatment should address the entire system. Let me briefly mention the framework of family therapy. The family systems approach does not ignore the fact that an individual may have disorders independently of the family, but the consideration in the family systems approach is that even though an individual may have disorders of his or her own, the other family members have to react to the disorder and make systemic adjustments to the problem. Thus, the problem of the individual becomes a systemic problem. The goal of the family systems therapy is a change in the system, which in turn will produce a change in the individual members. The members are made to change their dysfunctional patterns of relationship to functional ways of interacting. Let me speak about the different approaches of family therapy. First, let me explain the psychodynamic family therapy. More than any other school of family therapy, psychodynamic family therapy dealt directly with individual psychology and the unconscious in the context of current relationships. It continued to develop through a number of groups that were influenced by the ideas and methods of Nathan Ackerman and also by the British School of Object Relations and John Bowlby's work on attachment. Next, it is multiple family group therapy. This precursor of psychoeducational family intervention emerged in part as a pragmatic alternative form of intervention, especially as an adjunct to the treatment of serious mental disorders with a significant biological basis such as schizophrenia, and represented something of a conceptual challenge to some of the systemic paradigms of pathogenesis that were implicit in many of the dominant models of family therapy. The late 1960s and early 1970s saw the development of network therapy by Ross Speck and Caroline Athaneeff and emergence of behavioral marital therapy, renamed as behavioral couples therapy in the 1990s, and behavioral family therapy as models in their own right. By the late 1970s, the weight of clinical experience especially in relation to the treatment of serious mental disorders, had led to some revision of a number of the original models and a moderation of some of the earlier stridency and theoretical purism. There were the beginnings of a general softening of the strict demarcations between schools, with moves toward rapprochement, integration, and eclecticism, although there was nevertheless some hardening of positions within some schools. However, there was a growing willingness and tendency on the part of family therapists to work in multi-modal clinical partnerships with other members of the helping and medical professions. From the mid-1980s to the present, the field has been marked by a diversity of approaches that partly reflect the original schools, but which also draw on other theories and methods from individual psychotherapy. These approaches and sources include brief therapy, structural therapy, constructivist approaches, solution-focused therapy, narrative therapy, a range of cognitive and behavioral approaches, psychodynamic and object relations approaches, attachment and emotionally focused therapy, intergenerational approaches, network therapy and multisystemic therapy, multicultural, intercultural and integrative approaches are also being developed. Now let me state some of the techniques of family therapy. Family therapy uses a range of counseling and other techniques, including communication theory, media and communications, psychology, psychoeducation, psychotherapy, relationship education, systemic coaching, systems theory, and reality therapy. The number of sessions depends on the situation, but the range is between 5 and 20 sessions. The caseworker playing the role of a family therapist usually meets several members of the family at the same time. This has the advantage of making differences between the ways family members perceive mutual relations as well as interaction patterns in the session apparent both for the therapist and the family. These patterns frequently mirror habitual interaction patterns at home, even though the therapist is now incorporated into the family system. Therapeutic interventions usually focus on relationship patterns rather than on analyzing impulses of the unconscious mind or early childhood trauma of individuals as a Freudian therapist would do, although some schools of family therapy, for example psychodynamic and intergenerational, do consider such individual and historical factors. The distinctive feature of family therapy is its perspective and analytical framework rather than the number of people present at a therapy session. Family therapists are, in a special way, relational therapists. They are generally more interested in what goes on between individuals rather than within one or more individuals, although some family therapists tend to be as interested in individuals as in the systems. Let me mention some models of family therapy. There is no single unified theory of family systems therapy. Hence, we find some major models of family therapy. Some of the outstanding approaches are multi-generational family systems model by Murray Bowen, human validation process model by Virginia Satir, experiential or symbolic approach by Carl Whitaker, structural approach by Salvador Minuchin, strategic approach by J. Halley and Claude Madan, and recent innovations such as constructionism. I would like to review some of the prominent models of family therapy in the following subsections. Let me explain the multi-generational family therapy. Murray Bowen's family systems theory is also understood as a transgenerational or intergenerational family therapy. Since a predictable pattern of interpersonal relationships connects the functioning of the family members across generations, a family can be understood well when we analyze it from at least 3-generation perspective. Central to his theory, he identified 8 key concepts: differentiation of the self, triangulation, the nuclear family emotional system, the family projection process, the multi-generational transmission process, sibling position, emotional cutoff, and societal regression. Among them, he focused more on differentiation of the self and triangulation. Let me outline the key concepts in multi-generational family therapy. I begin with the differentiation of the self. Differentiation of the self means both the psychological separation of intellect and emotion as well as independence of the self from others. That is, differentiation can be at the intrapsychic and interpersonal levels. Intrapsychic differentiation is the ability to separate feeling from thinking. In an undifferentiated person, his or her intellect is so flooded with feelings that he or she is almost incapable of objective thinking. A differentiated person can choose between being guided by his or her feelings or by his or her thoughts. It is a matter of choice. Usually, lack of differentiation between thinking and feeling occurs along with lack of differentiation between oneself and others. A healthy position for an individual is that one is fused with a family and also remains separate as an individual. Let me mention about triangulation. In any intimate relationship between two individuals, there is bound to be anxiety. When there is stress in their relationship, they may invite a third party into the relationship to reduce their anxiety and gain stability. This, in a sense, is triangulation. It is hoped that the problem between the two individuals is solved, but it is not the case. The emotional tension may seem lessened, but the underlying conflict is not resolved, or rather it is made worse by the process of triangulation. Triangulations usually happen in the family when parents have conflicts. To reduce their anxiety and emotional tension, they involve their son or daughter into the game. Let me explain the next concept, the nuclear family emotional process. Emotional forces usually operate over the years in recurrent patterns. If there is a lack of differentiation in the family of origin, that will lead to emotional cutoff from parents, which in turn will lead to fusion in marriage. The less the differentiation prior to marriage, the more will be the fusion with the spouse. But this new fusion may not be stable and so may produce one or more of the following problems: reactive emotional distance between the spouses, physical or emotional dysfunction in one spouse, overt marital conflict and projection of the problem onto one or more children. The intensity of the above mentioned problems will be depending upon the degree of undifferentiation, the extent of emotional cutoff from families of origin, and the level of stress in the system. The next concept, family projection process, means the transmission of their immaturity and lack of differentiation by the parents to the children. For example, when the husband distances himself from his wife, the wife tends to care for their child extraordinarily, which is not a caring concern but an anxious and enmeshed concern. The child that is the object of this projection process becomes attached to the parents either positively or negatively, and the child will be the person least differentiated. The emotional fusion between the child and the mother may be a warm, dependent bond or an angry, conflictual struggle. Here, the mother's anxiety is focused on the child and the child's functioning is stunted. Because of the stunted development of the child, the mother all the more over controls the child and thus gets relief from her own anxiety, but at the same time cripples the child emotionally. The concept multi-generational transmission process is a process by which the family's emotional process is transmitted through multiple generations. The one who was involved in the emotional fusion with the family of origin moves towards a lower level of differentiation of self, whereas the one who was least involved moves towards a higher level of differentiation. Emotional illnesses are transmitted beyond the individual and nuclear family to several generations. Thus, a person with emotional illnesses in a family is a result of the emotional problems of his or her parents, parents, and so on for several generations. The problem is a result of a multi-generational sequence in which all family members are actors and reactors. Let me say something about the sibling position. Children tend to develop certain fixed personality characteristics depending on the sibling position in the family. Bowen's perspective offers a new outlook on the traditional concept of sibling rivalry by recognizing the triangular complications of the siblings' relationship with their parents. Sibling rivalry is only one aspect of the triangular process. It is intimately connected with the involvement of parents. Thus, a triangular relationship is responsible for the type of characteristics children develop. Next, let me tell you about the emotional cutoff. It is simply the way we manage undifferentiation and emotional intensity associated with it between generations. If the emotional fusion between generations is more, the greater will be the likelihood of cutoff. Some do it by literally moving away from the parents and settling down in a far off place, and some others move away from the parents emotionally. Next comes the societal emotional process. According to societal emotional process, the emotional process in society influences the emotional process in families. The societal emotional processes are like a background influence affecting all families. Let me speak about another model by name human validation process. This model which was established by Virginia Satir, is called conjoint family therapy. For her, techniques are secondary, and what is primary is the relationship the therapist establishes with the family. She emphasizes the enhancement and validation of self-esteem, family rules, congruence versus defensive communication patterns, sculpting, nurturing triads, family mapping, and family life fact chronologies. Let me mention the key concepts of this approach. Family life. As children, we enter into pre-existing systems, especially the family system. The family system of which we become a part already has rules, especially the rules that govern communication, such as who says what to whom and under what conditions. Worried parents set more rules to control their children. When rules are perceived as absolute and impossible to be followed, they pose a problem for the individuals. As children, we abide by the rules given by the family, but as adults, rules may be ineffective and dysfunctional. In a healthy family, there will be a fewer rules and they are consistently applied. Functional versus dysfunctional communication in families. There are evident differences between functional and dysfunctional communication patterns. In a family where there are functional communication patterns, the members are allowed to have their own individual lives and also a shared life. Change is always welcome and taken as an opportunity for growth. There is a lot of flexibility and open communication. In a family where there are dysfunctional communication patterns, one notices the opposite qualities of those mentioned in the functional communication patterns. There is hardly any support for individuality and relationship is mostly strained. Some rules cannot keep the system together. Eventually, the system breaks down. Defensive stances in coping with stress. When the family system is crumbling due to escalating stress, the members tend to resort to defensive stances. 4 universal communication patterns that serve as defensive postures or stress positions have been identified, namely placating, blaming, being super reasonable, and being irrelevant. The main goals of this therapy, according to Satir, are clear communication, expanding of awareness, enhancing potentials for growth, especially in self-esteem and coping with the demands and process of change. Let me briefly mention about the experiential or symbolic family therapy. It has a strong connections with other existential, humanistic and phenomenological orientations. This approach emphasizes on choice, freedom, self-determination, growth and actualization. Usually, the family members and the therapist interact with one another, and so the personal involvement of the therapist with the family is important, and therefore there are no techniques proposed. This approach is pragmatic and so in some sense anti-theoretical. Its goals are to promote the feeling dimension, which are spontaneity, creativity, the ability to play and the willingness to be crazy. For Whitaker, what brings about change is experience and not education. Most of the human experience occurs on the unconscious level, which can be reached symbolically. Here, symbolic will mean finding multiple meanings for the same process. Carl Whitaker believed that active and forceful personal involvement and caring of the therapist was the best way to bring about changes in families and promote flexibility among family members. He relied on his own personality and wisdom rather than any fixed techniques to stir things up in families and to help family members open up and be more fully themselves. Whitaker viewed the family as an integrated whole, not as a collection of discrete individuals, and felt that a lack of emotional closeness and sharing among family members resulted in the symptoms and interpersonal problems that led families to seek treatment or intervention. Let me outline the three phases of the therapy. The three phases of family therapy are engagement, involvement, and disentanglement. Accordingly, the role of the therapist too changes throughout the therapy. Initially, the therapist assumes an all-powerful position, thereby increasing the anxiety the family is experiencing. This makes members recognize interactional patterns. At this point, the family comes up with alternative ways of operating. The therapist might change his role from being a dominant and parental figure to being an advisor and a resource person. When the family members assume responsibility for their own living and changing, the therapist becomes more personal and less involved in the family system. Change in the family is to be experienced rather than designed. Change will take place only when the therapist disturbs or frustrates the family process. Let me sum up. Family therapy has a variety of origins. It is related to the long-standing emphasis of psychoanalysis and other psychodynamic approaches on the central role that early family relationships play in the formation of personality and the manifestation of psychological disorders. Family therapy, either alone or in conjunction with other types of interventions, has been effective in the treatment of children suffering from a variety of problems, including anxiety, enuresis, and eating disorders, and also in working with victims of child abuse. In addition to alleviating the child's initial complaint and improving communication within the family unit, family therapy can also help reduce stress and conflict by helping families improve their coping skills. Poor communication skills play a key role in perpetuating destructive interactions within families, such as the formation of alliances among some family members against the others. Psychodynamically oriented family therapy emphasizes unconscious processes and unresolved conflicts in the parents' families of origin. The lasting effects of traumatic experiences such as parental divorce and child abuse are explored. This type of therapy focuses more on family history and less on symptoms, resulting in a lengthier therapeutic process. Several other family therapy approaches, including that of Virginia Satir, are primarily concerned with communication. Satir's system combines the teaching of family communication skills, the promotion of self-esteem, and the removal of obstacles to the emotional growth so that family members can have full access to their innate resources. Let me sign off now and hope to see you in another session. Thank you.